What's going on YouTube? Jamie the Kid 00 here, and welcome back to episode 2 of Let's Learn to Play Yu-Gi-Oh! In the segment, Read the Rulebook. We're still working our way through the rulebook. Those of you who watched yesterday's segment, episode 1, will have seen that we talked about the various things that you're going to need to start playing a game, and how to correctly utilize your game mat. So if you haven't watched that, or you don't know how to correctly utilize your game mat, or what things you're going to need to play the game, please go and watch that segment now. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the second segment, which are the game cards. Now, I could sit in front of this camera all day and actually swing things at you, but I'm going to take you on over to my playmat, and we're going to point out in detail the things that you're going to need to know about the cards. Welcome to the playmat, guys. Apologies if there's any noise difference, but I have to sit very close to the camera to do this segment. So, here we're going to talk about the different types of cards that you'll use during your games, and what's basically everything means on them. As you can see, the cards are really quite cluttered, so there are quite a few things that we need to talk about. So we're going to look at this copy of a card. This is known as Treeborn Frog. I'm sorry if the glare gets to you. This is quite a well lit room. As you can see here, this is the title of the card. As you can see, it is called Treeborn Frog. This here is called the attribute. This attribute is water. It's a little blue circle. On this card called Tragodia, as you can see here, the attribute is dark, and it is actually called dark. You won't be able to see it on this camera, I don't believe, but on these symbols it actually says... No, you won't be able to see it on there, but it will actually say dark or water. Sorry about the change in focus there. So basically, every time you check one of these attributes, read what it is. There are only, I believe, 7 attributes. Dark, water, wind, fire, light, earth, and divine. But divine really won't matter to you very much. Now let's move on to these things. You notice all the stars along the tops of the pictures? They're called the level stars. They denote the level of your monster. As you can see, Tragodia has 10 stars and is a level 10 monster, whereas Treeborn Frog only has 1 star and is a level 1 monster. We'll go on to talk about what these different stars mean later on. Here is the image of the card. The image won't really serve much to your game, besides giving you a bit of atmosphere, so you get to imagine what the monsters are like. Moving down, we have the edition of your card, which only really matters to you if you're a collector, and the set it came from, which is on this side. As you can see, my Treeborn Frog is 1st edition, and my Tragodia is not 1st edition, because it does not say 1st edition. Again, this won't matter to you, and it won't impact your game. It only matters to you if you're a collector. Now we're probably going to move on to the most important part of the card, the effect box, or its flavor text in certain cards. You're currently looking at 2 effect monsters. Effect monsters are the orange cards in the game. Other cards that are monsters will be, of course, the cards that are in your extra deck, which we will get to later on, and normal monsters, which are in your main deck. Normal monsters won't have an effect. They will have what's called flavor text, which is just a little bit of background about them, which really doesn't impact your game. Again, it's like the picture. It just gives you some atmosphere on how the card may be. Now, we're going to read the effect of Treeborn Frog. Or the box on Treeborn Frog, if we can. Okay. As you can see here, Treeborn Frog has a little word that says aqua and then effect. This aqua is called its type. Cards have a lot of types. There are a lot of types. More than I'm actually going to care to go through in this video, but I can put a link to a relevant Wikipedia article on different monster types. The type will always be the first thing that's said on the card. Next to it you can see it says effect. Because this is an effect monster, it will have an effect. Its effect is written beneath it. The effect will always be written underneath it. However, if a certain card has conditions for its summon, that will also be written underneath it too. So now we know that this card is an effect monster because of its orange colour and the fact that it says effect. Okay, now moving on down to the last few things on the card. As you can see here, there are 2 numbers next to the words ATK and DEF. The ATK stands for attack. That is your monster's offensive power. This Treeborn Frog has an offensive power of 100. The DEF stands for defensive power, its ability to take hits. Again, Treeborn Frog's defensive power is 100. That's about all the characteristics you're really going to need to know about these cards to really kind of work with the dynamics of battles and playing your cards. So now whenever I talk about the attack, you know what it is. Whenever I talk about the attribute, you know what it is. When I talk about the type, you know what it is. When I talk about where its effect is printed, you know where that is, and its title, and its level, and so on. Now we're going to move on to the different types of monster card. I'm afraid I don't have any normal monsters to show you, but normal monsters, suffice to say, are yellower versions of these with no effect. That is the only difference between them. Next we're going to move on to the first of the extra deck cards that we're going to cover. If you guys have been watching the Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's anime, you may recognise this card. It's Yusei Fudo's Stardust Dragon. As you can see on this card, you will immediately recognise a lot of things that are similar to other monster cards. But you'll also notice that the card is a stark white compared to the orange and yellow of normal monsters. As you can see here, it still has an attribute. This is Wind. It still has levels, 8. Still has the title, an effect, and so on. Even the type, which is Dragon. However, then you will go on to realise the things that are different about it, besides the fact that it is white. Alongside saying that it has an effect, it is also a synchro monster. It says that it is a synchro monster. Underneath the Dragon Synchro Effect statement, you'll see that it says 1 tuner and 1 or more tuner monsters. That is its requirement for the summon, and we will get on to what that really means later on. Following that requirement for the summon, its effect is then printed. Certain cards will not have an effect. Synchro monsters that don't have effects won't have flavor text like normal monsters. Their box will just be left blank. So then we go on and we can see that attack and defense are still present. So that's about all you really need to know about the difference. A synchro monster will always have synchro printed here, between its type and its effect declaration. And it will always have the requirement of its summon here. Now, with synchro monsters, it's important to remember their level. So remember that Stardust Dragon has 8 stars, because that's going to be very essential for its summoning. Now we're going to move on to Xyz monsters. Xyz monsters are a very new thing to the game and add a very interesting dynamic to it. As you can see here, you'll immediately notice about a synchro monster, it is black, compared to a synchro monster which is white. Xyz monsters' stars are also on the opposite side of the card. This is because Xyz monsters do not possess a level. As you can see, there is no level on this side. They have what is called a rank. As you can see, Xyz monsters have the expected attribute, title, type, effect, and where it would normally say synchro monster, it says Xyz, or XYZ. And it also has its requirements, much like a synchro monster, and then its effect, as you can see here. Again, I'm not going to discuss the mechanics for bringing out your Xyz monsters just yet, but it's important to remember the Xyz monsters level. Again, I'm sorry about the glare, guys, I couldn't get the lighting sorted. It's important to remember an Xyz monster's rank, because that will be important for its summoning, much like a synchro monster. This is a fusion monster. As you can see, there are a lot of things that are very similar to Xyz and synchro monsters on this card. It has an attribute, it has a level, it has its type, it has effect. It also has fusion written here, much like you would in Xyz and a synchro. And there really isn't that much of a difference on this between it and your normal synchro monsters. It says here that it requires a Cyber Dragon and one or more machine-type monsters. Those are its requirements for a fusion summon. Now, fusion summons are very tricky, and we're going to explain those later on in the monsters and spell cards section, so you don't need to worry about that just yet. Just remember that on all of these cards, the requirements are printed here, just under its type and effect and things like that. And then its effect will be printed underneath the requirements. Okay, after outlining the different things about the monster cards, say attribute, type, as I've just showed you, the rulebook, as I'm following that as my guide for these segments, then goes on to say, what is a monster card? So I'm going to recount that to you now, because of course this is a journey for me as well, so I can't exactly teach you it unless I have read it. Monster cards are used to battle and defeat your opponents. Battles between monster cards are the foundation of any duel, which we've already established, with attack and defense points being the key determining factors of the power of a monster, really. There are many kinds of monster cards. This game is more than a simple slugfest, so monsters with high attack and defense points will not be enough. There are also monsters with strong special effects, even though their attack and defense points are low. Therefore, your success in a duel depends on how skillfully you can make use of the kinds of cards. Let's take a look at the different types of monsters. Here they show the normal monsters, which I highlighted to you earlier, saying that they will usually be basic monsters with high attack powers and of course no abilities. They then go on to cite about effect monsters, and the different types of effects that an effect monster can have. There are 5 categories of effect which we're going to go through here. They are flip effect, continuous effect, ignition effect, trigger effect, and quick effect. None of the cards will specifically say that they are a continuous ignition trigger or quick effect, but many cards will say that they are flip effects. So it is important to realise that. So we're going to move on to a segment on flip effects. Flip effect. This is an effect that is activated when a face down card is flipped face up. This can happen when it is flip summoned, attacked while face down, or flip face up by a card effect. These effects start with the word flip in all caps, and it is the start of the effect. When you have a face down monster, your opponent must be wary because they don't know if it has a flip effect or not. That is the trap of it all. If you would like a flip effect monster to study, link will be in the description below to Raikou, the Lightsworn Hunter. That is a flip effect monster, so you can go take a look at it, and that will be an example for you guys. That's literally all I have to know about flip effects. When the card flips from face down to face up, basically by any means that does not negate a flip effect, the flip effect will activate, and then you carry on due course. On to the next type of effect. The next type of effect we're going to cover here is continuous effect. This effect is active while an effect monster card is face up on the field. The effect starts when the face up monster appears on the field and ends once it is gone or no longer face up. There is no trigger for its activation. It does not have any activation timing. This won't be relevant to you right now, but continuous monsters will not start a chain. We're going to move on to chains later on, but I'm just letting you have that for your notes now. Continuous monsters cannot be responded to. Remember that. These monsters are most powerful if you have a strategy to protect them while they're on the field. An example of an effect that was continuous would be worded like so: monsters with 2000 or less attack cannot declare an attack. If you're looking for an example of a card with a continuous effect, a link will be in the description below, again under continuous effect. It will be a card named Jinzo. If you read his effect, that is an example of a continuous effect. Feel free to check that one out. The next type of card we're going to go over is Ignition Effect. Now, I'm going to briefly go over rulings for Ignition Effects, but Ignition Effects are some of the most complicated things in the game when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of how they resolve. We are going to get onto that a lot later in this series, but for now, all you're going to need to know is what I tell you in this. The things I will tell you later will only matter in literally 1% of your games, and what you will know here will be enough to play a basic game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Ignition Effect. You use this type of effect by declaring its activation during your main phase. Ignition effects can only be used during your main phase unless they say otherwise. There are some ignition effects that have a cost to activate, like discarding cards from your hand, tributing a monster, or paying your life points. Because you can choose when to activate this type of effect, it's easy to create combos with them. An example of a trigger effect would be, you can tribute this card to destroy one monster on the field. It's important to remember that these cards can only be activated during your own main phase, so you can't exactly activate its effect during your opponent's turn to destroy an opponent's monster. In that example. It just doesn't work like that. The next type of effect that's similar in rulings later on to ignition effects is trigger effects. These effects are activated when a specific need is met. They activate at specific times, such as during the standby phase, so during a phase of your turn, its effect will activate, or can be activated. Or when a monster is destroyed. Of course, the conditions have then been met of its effect. These cards can lead to interesting combos, but it's easier for your opponent to predict when they happen, because often these cards rely on your opponent doing something, or rely on waiting for something to happen, so of course it's easier for your opponent to play around them. An example of this will be, when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, destroy one card on the field. I forgot to give you guys an example reference for the last ignition effects as well, so 2 links will be in the description below to 2 different cards with an ignition and a trigger effect. Check those out. The last effect, I believe, that we're going to go to is Quick Effect. Now these are complicated as well. These are special monster effects that you can activate even during your opponent's turn. These types of effects have a spell speed of 2, whereas every other effect has a spell speed of 1. Spell speeds won't mean much to you now, but it's again something for your notes that we will get to later on in the rulebook when rulings get a bit more complicated. Since it's difficult for your opponent to predict these cards, they can give them an unexpected surprise. An example of this is an effect that says you can activate this effect during either player's turn, and so on and so forth. Again, an example of a card that activates in your opponent's turn will be left in the description below. You will be looking for Legendary 6 Samurai Shien. It can use its effect once per turn, but because it is a quick effect, it can activate in your opponent's turn. So there's one for you guys to check out. Now it's important to move on to a few game mechanics. Earlier on the playmat, I showed you guys footage of white cards, black cards, and purple cards. And I never actually explained how you actually get access to those cards, because I outlined in episode 1 that you can't just drop them on the field from your extra deck. So first we're going to talk about white cards, which I outlined are called Synchro Monsters. Synchro Monsters, of course, are placed in your extra deck. They are separated from the main deck. You can special summon a powerful Synchro Monster from the field in an instant by using the levels of your monsters. Those are the little red stars just above the monster. Just above the image of the monster on the card. They can be Synchro summoned from the extra deck by sending a face-up tuner monster, a monster that says tuner where it would normally say effect in its description bar. And it's usually one, but any number of face-up non-tuner monsters. So monsters that do not say tuner. They may be normal monsters, effect monsters, or even other synchro monsters. As long as they don't say tuner, it's all fair game. When the sum of all their levels is exactly the level printed on the synchro monster card, you can send those cards to the graveyard and then special summon the synchro monster in exchange. Again, there is a segment that also goes on to talk about tuner monsters, saying that in order to synchro summon a synchro monster, you need one tuner, and the tuner monster and other face-up monsters you use for the synchro summon are called synchro material monsters. The sum of their levels is the level of synchro monster you can create and summon. We're going to go through rulings on when and how you can synchro summon. During your main phase, you can declare a synchro summon when the combined levels of one face-up tuner monster and one or more face-up non-tuner monsters are equal to the level of the synchro monster you wish to summon. After double-checking the level of the synchro monster you want, send the face-up synchro material monsters from your side of the field to the graveyard. Remember, only one can be a tuner monster. After sending these monsters from the field to the graveyard, take the synchro monster from your extra deck and play it onto the field in face-up attack position or face-up defense position. It's important to remember that when special summoning, unless an effect allows you to, the summon must be face-up. You may not place it face down on the field. Now we're going to move on to the purple cards, Fusion Monsters. Fusion Monsters are also placed in your extra deck. They are summoned by using the specific monsters listed on the card combined with a spell card, remember the green cards, called Polymerization, which is a card used to fuse two monsters together. They usually have special abilities and very high attack points as well, because they're very difficult to get out. If you have all the fusion monsters listed on the fusion monster card, either on the field or in your hand, you can activate Polymerization, placing it on your spell and trap card zone. There are other cards that can cause a fusion, but Polymerization is the most common one. After sending the fusion material monsters, similar to a synchro summon, to the graveyard, take the appropriate fusion monster from your extra deck and play it onto the field in either face-up attack or defense position, again like a synchro summon. Finally, place the Polymerization card in the graveyard, like you would any other normal spell card. Remember that in order to use a fusion monster during a duel, it needs to be in your extra deck. You can't just fusion for something you don't have. Since fusion summons require specific cards, be sure to include those necessary cards in your main deck, because you're not going to be able to bring it out without the right cards. Another card that I forgot to outline in the main deck, but I will have shown you in the playmat segment of this video, is Ritual Monsters. Ritual Monsters are special monsters that are special summoned with a specific ritual spell card, along with a required tribute. Ritual monster cards are placed in the main deck, and cannot be special summoned unless you have all the proper cards together in your hand or on the field. Ritual monsters genuinely have, again, high attack and defense, and usually have special abilities, very similar to fusion monsters. How to ritual summon, and you've got to pay attention to this, because again, it's like a fusion. When you have a ritual spell card, along with the matching ritual monster in your hand, along with the required tribute, remember tribute, you can activate the ritual spell card, placing it in the spell and trap card zone. If the activation of the spell card is successful, tribute monsters by sending them from your hand or the field to the graveyard. The ritual spell card will list the required amount to tribute. This often requires a tribute of levels, very similar to that of synchro summoning. After sending the tributed monsters to the graveyard, play the ritual monster card onto the field in either face-up attack position similar to fusion and synchro summoning. Finally, place the ritual spell card in the graveyard, after you've resolved its effect. Now the last card we're going to talk about, which I don't actually have in this book, because this book is from before it came out, are the black cards, called Xyz monsters, or Exceed monsters, if that's easier for your tongue to pronounce. The cards are printed with an XYZ on their description, where it normally says Synchro Monster or things like that. They are summoned in a very special way. They are summoned by taking 2 monsters, or 3, depending on how many they require. This will be printed in the description of their card, usually in the same place where a Synchro Monster would specifically state how many tuners and non-tuners it requires. You would take the relative monsters of the same level, and you would simply overlay them on the field, and then place your Xyz monster from your extra deck on top of them. The cards underneath it no longer count as being on your field for any purposes of card effects, and count as a thing called Xyz material. They merely represent the material attached to that Xyz monster. Xyz monsters often have effects which require you to detach an Xyz material to pay the cost. Detaching the Xyz material means you take it out from underneath the card and place it in your graveyard. Remember, those cards did not count as being on the field, so any effects that activate when a card is sent from the field to the graveyard will not activate, because it wasn't on the field. It just went to the graveyard. You'll have to remember that, because that confuses a lot of people. Otherwise, if an Xyz monster would be destroyed, and it still has Xyz materials, just send the Xyz monster and the remaining materials straight to the graveyard. That's all you have to do. The materials do not return to the field. Cool. Now we're going to get onto the actual simple stuff, because we've just gone through all the difficult stuff. So let's get on to something easier. Summoning monster cards. There are several ways to play monsters onto the field. These ways can be categorized into 2 groups. Actions that can be done only once per turn, and actions that can be done multiple times per turn. The first and most key action is the normal summon. This is the most common way to summon a monster, simply by playing a monster card from your hand onto the field in face-up attack position. Now remember, only face-up attack position. You can only normal summon in face-up attack position. So that means vertical position, remember? All normal monsters and most effect monsters, unless they have a specific restriction, can be summoned in this way. However, for monsters that are level 5 or higher, that means if they have more than 5 or more stars on their card, remember above the picture, you must tribute at least 1 monster, which means you send a monster that is on your field to the graveyard, and then you may summon the monster. Kind of think of it as the monster is so powerful, you need to sacrifice a little guy to bring it out, because it's so powerful. Think about it like that. This is referred to more specifically as a tribute summon, because that will affect certain card effects. Monsters that are level 5 or 6 require 1 tribute, so 1 monster from your field to be sent to the graveyard. And monsters that are level 7 or higher, up until 12, because 12 is the maximum, require 2 tributes. There is never anything that requires 3, unless the card specifically says it needs it. Another type which takes up your normal summon, I should probably note that you can only normal summon once per turn, is a set. If you set, you cannot normal summon, and if you normal summon, you cannot set. This only applies for monsters. To play a monster card from your hand in face down position is called a set. You play cards in face down defense position. You cannot play cards in face up attack position. In order to set monsters at a level 5 or higher, you'll have to follow the same procedure of tribute summoning. But you don't have to reveal it to your opponent or anything. Simply tribute the monster and play the card face down. You do not have to show them it. It is important to remember that a monster set on the field in face down defense position is not considered summoned. It has been set and can be summoned with a flip summon or flip face up by an attack or card effect. Remember, you can only normal summon or set once per turn. So if you set a monster, you cannot normal summon a monster that turn. And also as a note, now that we've finished this segment on normal summons and sets, you cannot play a monster from your hand onto the field in face-up defense position, unless you're special summoning it, which we'll get onto later. We noted in an earlier segment about something called flip summoning. When you have a face-down defense position monster, and it's been on the field for more than 1 turn, you can flip it from face-down defense position into face-up attack position, without using a card effect. This is called a manual position change. You can only manually change the position of a card once per turn. so basically changing it without a card effect, and you cannot manually change the position of a card on the turn in which it was played onto the battlefield. This is called a flip summon. When you flip summon, you cannot change the monster into face-up defense position. You can only flip it from face-down defense position into face-up attack position. A monster card cannot be flip summoned in the same turn that it was set onto the field. You cannot use most monsters' effects until they are face-up. Another very key summon, which is the summon that encompasses all Synchro, Xyz, Fusion, and Ritual summons, is called a special summon. Some monsters can be played onto the field without being normal summoned or set, because there's certain conditions, like a Ritual summon. This is called a special summon. Synchro summons, Fusion summons, Ritual summons are all special summons. Some effect monsters also have specific conditions that allow you to special summon them. An example of this will be Cyber Dragon, which you can see in the description below, under Conditions of Special Summon. These monsters are considered special summon monsters. Unless otherwise specified, a special summoned monster is played onto the field in your choice of face-up attack position or face-up defense position. You cannot special set a monster unless its effect allows you to. Special summoning with a card effect. This is slightly different from special summoning, because the card effect brings them out. Certain cards would respond to a special summon and destroy it. If they were brought out by a card, they wouldn't be able to, but we'll get onto that later on as it's very complicated. Special summoning with a card effect. Monsters can also be special summoned onto the field through the effect of another card. This is different from special summon monsters. You cannot use a card effect to special summon those monsters from your hand, deck, or graveyard unless it was properly special summoned first. So say if a Synchro monster was sent from your extra deck to your graveyard without actually being correctly summoned first, you would not be able to revive it from your graveyard because it was not correctly summoned in the first place. It was not correctly Synchro summoned. This will apply for most things, but there are a few exceptions. Next we're going to move on to the section which talks about the cards which will really define your battles between your monsters, your spells and trap cards. The green and pink cards which will make up your back row, as they're known. The back row of your playmat. These are usually cards that will perform a supporting act in pushing your monsters to the victory. Now I'm going to take you over to the playmat and show you guys different types of spell cards. The next thing we're going to move on to talk about are spell cards. Spell cards are a different type of card entirely from monster cards. As you can see, they don't have an attribute. They have a special attribute called spell. It has nothing to do with the same things as monsters would. As you can see here, where the level would be, it actually says spell card. It does not have a level. As you can see on this Book of Moon, next to where it says spell card, it has a little symbol. These symbols mean things. We'll go on to talk about what the different symbols mean later on, and there'll be a Wikipedia article linked in the description for you guys to go look at the different types of these symbols and what they can mean, because I do not have enough examples to show you. As you can see, much like monsters, spells have an effect box and an image. Again, the image just adds flavour to the card. It's really the text box that you want to concentrate on, because that contains all the power of your spell card. So now we're going to look at this card, as if the focus will work. As you can see here, it has an effect. It does not have any type or anything relevant to that, because none of that's going to matter. You're only activating these cards for their effect. Later on I'll go on to talk about the different types of spell cards and their activation timings. This is a normal spell card, so just remember that. So when you come back to this, you can look at it and remember that this is a normal spell card. This Book of Moon is known as a quick play spell card. The lightning bolt next to the word spell card denotes that it's a quick play spell card. Other different cards will have different little symbols. So just remember that, and I'll go on to talk about that later on in the video. That is quite literally all you're going to need to know about these cards, other than, basically, here's their effect, here is their title, and here is the fact that they're a spell card, and here is what type of spell card they are. And while I'm here, I should probably show you trap cards as well. Very similar to spell cards, we have trap cards. Trap cards activate in a very similar way to spell cards, which we'll go on to explain in a bit. But here, as you can see, like a spell card, it does not have a level, it simply says trap card. And up here in its attribute zone, it says trap. And in its bottom box, it says its effect. Again, sorry about the glare. Over here, as you can see on this trap card, it's a different type of trap card. It's called a counter trap. And you can see it by this little swooping arrow. Again, we'll go on to talk about what these mean later on. And again, that is literally all you need to know about traps. Effect box, trap, and type of trap. So now we're going to move on to what these mean. Okay, let's talk about the different types of spell cards, because we're going to talk about them specifically here. Spell cards can normally be activated during your main phase, unless a condition allows them to be activated in another timing. And they help you out with different effects. Spell cards have many powerful effects, like destroying other cards or strengthening yours or weakening your opponent's monsters. Save these cards in your hand until you can get the best results out of them. We're going to start off with the basic type of spell card. As you will have seen on the playmat, certain spell cards can have little symbols next to the word spell card. The kinds that don't are normal spell cards, and we're going to talk about them now. Normal spell cards have single-use effects. To use a normal spell card, announce its activation to your opponent, placing it face up on the field as I demonstrated in episode 1. If the activation succeeds, you resolve the effect that is written on the card, and after resolving it, you send it to the graveyard. It's been used, and it's done with. As we outlined earlier, there are a type of cards called ritual spell cards, the kind with the burning torch I showed you earlier. These spell cards are used to perform ritual summons. Use these cards in the same way you would normal spell cards. They don't really have that many different rules, you just follow their conditions that are written on the card. Continuous spell cards. These cards remain face up on the field when they're activated. They don't go to the graveyard after they resolve, unless they're destroyed by something or unless their effect causes them to be sent. These cards remain face up on the field once they're activated, and their effect continues while the card stays face up on the field, much like a continuous monster effect. By using continuous spell cards, you create lasting positive effects with a single card, which is great, but there's the chance that the opponent will remove it from the field before you benefit from the effect. Another type which we showed are the kind with a large thick cross next to the word spell card are equip spell cards. Think of equip spell cards as the equipment for your monsters, arming them with swords, shields, weapons, different things. These cards give an extra effect to one face-up monster of your choice, either yours or your opponent's depending on the card. They remain on the field after they're activated, much like continuous spell cards. The equip card affects only one monster, called the equipped monster, but still occupies one of your spell and trap card zones. If possible, place it in the zone directly behind the equipped monster to help you remember. If the equipped monster is destroyed or leaves the field, flip face down or, as it says here, remove from the field, equipped cards are destroyed. The card with the thinner cross on it is the field spell card. As we showed you earlier, the bright green area on your playmat is specifically where you play field spell cards. There can only be one face-up field spell on the field at any time. That includes your opponent's side. So if your opponent has one and you play yours, your opponent's one leaves the field. These cards behave much like continuous spell cards, but they can have different effects. The final type of spell card, which kind of borders on being a trap, is a quick play spell card. The card with the lightning bolt next to the word spell card. These cards are special spell cards that can be activated during any phase of your turn, not just your main phase. You can also activate them during your opponent's turn, if you set the card face down first, much like one of your traps, but then you cannot activate the card in the same turn you set it. Every spell card can be activated in the turn you set it. If you set a spell card and then flip it face up, you can activate it in your turn. However, quick play spell cards cannot be used in such a manner. If you set it, you have to wait until the next player's turn to use it. Now we'll move on to trap cards. Trap cards share some of the emblems that are used by spell cards, but some have their own unique abilities and their own unique emblems. First we're going to talk about normal trap cards, which similar to spell cards, have no logo next to the word trap card. Before you can activate a trap card, much like a quick play spell, you have to set it on your field first. You can activate it in the same turn that you've set it, but you can activate it any time after that, starting from the beginning of the next turn. That includes your opponent's turn. Normal trap cards have single-use effects, and once their effects are resolved, they will be sent to the graveyard, just like normal spells. They are similar to normal spell cards because once activated, their effects are not likely to be stopped. However, your opponent can destroy your face-down trap cards the turn they were set, before you can activate them. So say your opponent had a face-down card in their turn and you set your card. They can respond with their card and destroy it. Because of this, you must be smart about how you use your trap cards. You don't want to just throw them down and waste them. Next, much like continuous spells, you have continuous traps. They share the same logo as a continuous spell. Just like continuous spell cards, continuous trap cards remain face up on the field when they're activated, and their effects continue when they are face up on the field. Some continuous trap cards have abilities similar to the ignition effects or trigger effects that could be found on monster cards. Continuous trap cards have effects that limit your opponent's options or slowly damage their life points over the course of the game. Trap cards do have their own one unique category, however, and these are known as counter trap cards. Trap cards which activate in response to things. They cannot activate on their own. These trap cards are normally activated in response to the activation of other cards, and may have abilities like negating the effects of those cards, so stopping them from working. These types of traps are effective against normal spell cards, normal trap cards, which are otherwise hard to stop. However, many counter trap cards require a cost to activate them, because they're just so powerful. We're just going to quickly outline the difference between set spell cards and set trap cards. Spell cards can be set face down on the field like trap cards, however the rules for the two different types of cards are different. Spell cards can be activated during the main phases, even in the same turn you set them, except for quick play spell cards of course, as we outlined earlier. Setting them does not allow you to use them on your opponent's turn, however. They must still only be activated in your main phase. You can set a spell card face down on the field to bluff your opponent into thinking you have a powerful trap. Okay then guys, this has been a really long episode, but I hope it's been informative. It went into a lot of detail on all the different types of cards you can use, so I hope it's educated you, and I hope you've managed to sit through all of this. I hope that the next episode will be a bit shorter, as this is going to take me ages to edit and put up on YouTube, but nonetheless, I hope it helps you, I hope it is educating you, and I hope you continue to follow the series. Otherwise, this has been Jamie the Kid 00, and I'll see you next time with Section 3, and how to play the game. Thanks for watching guys, see you soon. Bye.